All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's edition of the Student Athlete Interview Initiative. My name is Emily Schmid, and today I'm here with Stephen Brown. He's a senior at George Washington University on the men's golf team. He is getting his bachelor's in business administration with concentrations in finance and accounting and a minor in political science. And this summer, Stephen and I were actually fellow interns at Deloitte this summer. So, Stephen, I was just wondering if you could tell me how you chose to major in finance and accounting and why you chose to, enter that industry as an intern.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. It was actually it's somewhat of a late transition, I guess. I started when I first came to GW. I knew I wanted to do business, but I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do beyond that. I think originally I actually started I think I was business analytics, and I wasn't really sure. I kind of looked to my older teammates. I'm sure that's kind of a common theme for most athletes. But going into the summer before my junior year, yeah, so I just like threw out a bunch of random applications on Handshake. And one of them that happened to pick up the phone and call me was Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority. And they're like, well, do you want to work in corporate finance to do accounting? I was like, well, I'll take anything at this point. I think it was pretty late. Um, and so I worked in the summer there, and they talked a lot about, oh, this is what we do. And, it wasn't that I really enjoyed it, but it was more that like I got a lot of exposure out of it. And I did like kind of doing accounting, but I also gained a lot of perspective from older teammates. And it was more, I have a couple teammates that graduated, one the year before I got here that I stay in touch with a lot, and one was a senior. And they both work at big four firms, one in audit and one doing advisory. So I kind of looked to them and kind of saw what they were doing and said, you know what, like that looks like a pretty cool life. Like what they're doing looks pretty fun. So that kind of made it easier, I guess. And so I guess it's somewhat happenstance, but it's kind of shaped a lot by who my teammates are and what they've enjoyed.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like looking to other people to help guide you is kind of like the best advice you can get because they were in your shoes such a short time ago. So, kind of looking at this summer specifically, when you were going through the application process and interview process, can you just tell me kind of what that looked like? Did you have multiple interviews? Were they over, video, or were they over phone, or were they in person, on campus, kind of like that sort of realm?
Yeah, I guess a kind of a common theme. I was pretty late to everything. I didn't almost miss the deadline, but I was looking kind of at I still wasn't sure that I wanted to go into accounting, but I was like, you know what, it seems like I have experience in this area, so I'll apply. And I was looking at various things, and what I didn't realize, and I wish other people had told me this before, was that like the deadlines for applying to these jobs are so early. Like I think it was
Yeah.
October 1. I think you had to, even earlier maybe, that you had to have your application in. So when you're looking at, you want to start applying like August 15th before your junior year, if not earlier. Some people do discovery stuff, but um, so when I finally applied to a bunch of things, the interview process, at least for Deloitte, was much shorter than I expected. I guess I didn't really expect to get an interview, but once I did get an interview, they said it's an in-person one, which was nice. I thought that was a lot easier than doing. I've done also a video conferencing one, which is not as fun. But for the interview process, it was two 30-minute interviews, and one was behavioral, which is basically like conversation, kind of what we're doing now. And then the other one was a case study, which was more challenging. And I'm not sure if there's many ways to prepare for a case study. I don't know. You probably did a lot of preparation for case studies. I'd never done one before. And so I didn't know how to prepare totally. And I think kind of the goal of them, and just kind of after doing a couple of them, is kind of just to confuse you and make you think on your feet. Like there's no right answer. You're pretty much just making things up as you go and trying to draw on any knowledge that you have. I remember mine was about like 5G technology, AI, and like regulatory risk. And I was like, I know nothing about that. I think the only thing I could point to was like, oh yeah, like there's a lot of regulatory risks. Like Mark Zuckerberg's in front of Congress now, like talking because he's in trouble about something. But I didn't, it was like I didn't really know anything. So I think that was kind of my interview process. And then there was like a short phone call with a partner. That was the Deloitte one. And then I also interviewed at EY. That one was weird because you recorded your interview. So they kind of flash a question up on the screen and you have to answer it. That's brutal. I don't recommend that. That's no fun. And then so then that was the first round. Then the second round was in person. But yeah. So that was definitely revolved more around behavioral, and actually another case study that involved math, which was not great either. But overall, it's not a fun thing to do. I think the behavioral ones are actually fun, but the case studies and the math-based ones are never fun.
Yeah. So like kind of looking back on those, like you said, like case studies, math one, now that you had that experience, is there anything like you wish you did before, or like any sort of resources maybe you found after the fact that maybe would have been helpful beforehand?
Yeah, I think it would have been good because mostly the people that I relied on interviewed like 2 to 3 years prior to me talking to them. So they were interviewing 2, 3, 4 years almost before me. So they didn't remember. And obviously the stuff changes. So I think if you can find older teammates that are doing like I would be a good example, or you'd be a good example, like, oh, I did the case study last year, I can tell you what it was. That would be really helpful. And they're also, I think, going into it, what I wish I realized was almost that they aren't trying to test. They will help you a little bit, so they like want you to succeed. So I think that's the biggest thing. They just want to see you meet them halfway on that. Like, are you trying? Are you coming up with interesting answers? Are you able to have a conversation? And yeah, so I think that's probably what I wish, is like I talked to someone that had just done it, because I didn't prepare at all, and I probably should have. There probably should have been more preparation there. And I think talking to someone who had just done it would have made it a lot easier.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. I think also like what I've heard is, they just want to see if you can think critically, and like you're not going to know all of the technology that they use, but they just want to be able to see your step-by-step process. So I think that's really important.
Definitely.
Um, and so like I guess for more of the behavioral interview questions is definitely, I'd say, where sports would come up. So can you think of any specific question where you were able to tie in your experience, like either golfing before college or during college, just kind of like being able to use your experiences being a student athlete to help answer those kinds of questions?
Definitely. I was pretty nervous going into the Deloitte interview, and I walk in, and the partner, he stands up and he goes, "Look, I'm already biased. You play golf, I play golf. Like, let's just talk about that for the most of the interview." And we did. I think for like 25 minutes, probably of the 30 minutes, we talked about golf. And then for 5 minutes, he was like, "So, what'd you do last summer?" And that was pretty much my interview. But he did ask a little bit like, okay, so what are challenges that you faced? What are challenges that you faced? Like, what I think one of the specific questions was something like, what's something you did wrong, or what's something you messed up, and how would you have fixed it? I guess you'll probably get a lot of questions like that. And I think for me, it is a behavioral interview, so it's always easier to relate it to your own experiences, right? So especially like interpersonal ones. So I think what I said specifically was, when our freshmen first came in that year, I think we struggled with them. We were trying to figure out how to integrate them into the team. They were both international. And I don't think I did a good job of that. I don't think any of us did. And we struggled for like a month or two. And, that definitely was difficult, but we learned from those experiences, and we were able to adapt to what they needed. One of them likes to be more alone. We're a very close team, but one of them is like, no, I don't want to hang out every night, or I don't want to be there every Friday or every Saturday. Like I have my own things. And then the other one, he likes to have a lot of friends, right? He's like a bunch, like we're a very close knit team, but I wouldn't say we're super involved in the athletic department, but he very much wanted to be. So we kind of had to strike a balance, versus the other one doesn't want to be involved at all. So you kind of have to strike a balance, and you can't force them. And so that's kind of what I like to relate to when I get questions like that. Like, how do you relate your athletic experience? Well, there's that. And like also just like the difficulty of your sport, right? I think when I was talking to people at Deloitte, even, especially like the first years, they're like, yeah, it's crazy. Like, don't really have time. It's like, you're just tired, like after a 40-hour week and, 50-hour week, like it's tough adapting to a work schedule. And it was confusing to me, because I was like, when I worked 40 hours of the summer, that was easier than like school. It was more fun. Like that was way easier. you were tired, but you logged off at 5 or 6, or even if you had a long day, you work 10 hours, you're done when you log off. Like, you log off. School, you don't log off, right? You
Hmm.
start class 8, 9, you have class, you have practice, you have workouts, then if you want to do work on your own, and then you have homework, right? So there's no real end to it. And I think, and like Saturdays and Sundays are off. So I think drawing on those experiences and kind of showing, I guess, your interviewer that, like, hey, I'm ready to attack 50-hour work weeks because I do that already. Like, that would be easier for me than what I'm doing now. And I think that's an important trait that a lot of athletes have. And it seems normal to us, but it's not normal to everyone else. So kind of relaying that, I think, kind of impresses the person you're interviewing. They go, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially how you're talking about the first part was like kind of like a team issue. I feel like so many of the behavioral questions are geared around like, can you work in a team?
Mhm.
And we've been on teams and, for so long, and that's been such a big part of our lives. I feel like it's so beneficial to bring in like a sports sort of experience when answering those kinds of questions.
Well, yeah, totally. And like, when it's interesting because a lot of the firms, right, that you're interviewing for, they're taking, they try and take the best students from the university. Well, that's kind of what a college team is, right? You've taken like the best students from all these different high schools, the best athletes, right? And they all have different attitudes, right? They all have the attitude like, hey, I'm pretty good, but like, you have to make them all work together. And that's, I guess, kind of an environment that you would find at a job. So I think kind of creating that vision of like, oh, I've done this already, and been successful at it because you're still on the team, right? So creating that is probably really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So just kind of to close it out, what's the biggest piece of advice you'd give to a student athlete who is entering the interview stage in the coming weeks or month?
I'd say practice. Practice with your. I know it sounds stupid. I remember before my recruiting trips, my mom would sit me down in the hotel. She'd be like, "All right, I'm gonna pretend to be the coach, and you're gonna pretend to be you, and we're gonna go through an interview, right?" But those things, it's like the most awkward, miserable, not fun thing to do because it feels so stupid. But it helps so much because it's that you feel uncomfortable when you're practicing with your friend or your teammate, but that's exactly the feeling that you'll have when you're staring an interviewer in the face, right? It's like that same, like, I don't know how to answer this question, but the more you practice it, I've actually found interviewing, especially the behavioral side, can be kind of enjoyable. And then have questions prepared. I think one, it gets you out of answering questions yourself. So if I fire a question back at you, I no longer have to talk, right? And you sound smart because you're like, oh, you're interested. So I think practicing and having questions like on hand and like thinking of them. So when that person's talking, you should listen. You should be listening, but you should also be thinking of a question while they're talking because that's your break. Like when they're talking, that's your time to think of follow-up questions, think of things like that. And I think those two things make it a lot more easier and almost kind of fun to get to know people.
Perfect. I think that's such great advice. And like you said, practicing is awkward, especially if it's someone you're close with, but it's going to be just as awkward when you're
Yeah.
actually in the room. So you have to do it one way or the other.
Yeah, I just remember sitting like so many times in the hotel room with my mom going, why are we doing this? This is so annoying. But then like you'd get, in the room with a coach and he'd ask you a question and you're like, oh, well, I answered this to my mom last night. I'm just
Mhm.
repeating it. Like, it's not that hard. And there's always curveballs. And like when you get those, just kind of sit back and talk slowly and think, and your brain will come up with something, I've always found.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Stephen, for talking with me today. If you guys have any questions, just let us know, in the comments or contact us in our form, and we'll be sure to post more videos. So thank you.
Thanks.